The Muffin Man is seated at the table in the laboratory of...
Hi kids, and welcome to the Magic Show. In this video I'm going to be implementing the bulk of this tutorial here from Magic's main websites, more specifically the CRUD HTTP REST endpoints here from this point and downwards. So with that in mind, let's get started. First, we need to create a bunch of files. So I'm going to go to the Files menu item here. Then I'm going to open up the Modules folder. Then I'm going to open up the Tutorials folder. And then I'm going to start creating my files. My first file is going to be actor.post.hl. Then I'm going to edit it. Then I'm going to put in this content into the file. Then I am going to save it. Then I'm going to create actor.get.hl. So let's create a new file. Okay. Actor.get. Let's delete its existing content and let's put this thing into it. Save the file and collapse it. Let's create a new file. This time it's going to be called actor.put.hl. Okay. Let's replace its default content with this thing. Save it and collapse it, and then let's create the last one, actor.delete.hl, which of course is the delete invocation. Whoops. So of course, as you're all probably aware of from before, CRUD is an acronym. It implies create, read, update and delete. And I've now created my create HTTP REST endpoint, I've created my read HTTP REST endpoint, and I've created my update HTTP REST endpoint, and I've created my delete HTTP REST endpoint. So let's play around with them. Go to the endpoints, click show all endpoints, and filter by actor. That's probably smartest. First, let's get the actors. Okay, limit 5, offset 0. Invoke get, and here you can see 5 actors. You can of course play around with the offset as you see fit. Now of course it gets from the first item, and if I invoke it again with an offset of 10, we'll probably start out with actor ID 11 here, I imagine, which it did. I can take any one of these actors. I can do, for instance, okay, actor ID 11. Currently, its first name is 0. Its last name is Cage. If I find my update HTTP REST endpoint here, and I paste in an actor ID of 11, I paste in a first name of Thomas and a last name of Hansen, and then I invoke it. If I now go back to my get HTTP endpoint here, which you can see the results of here, currently shows 0 Cage as the name for this particular actor. If I invoke it again, it's going to say Thomas Hansen, of course. And of course, the last update was being changed because this is a trigger in the Sakila MySQL database. If you don't have the Sakila MySQL database, or for that matter MySQL database at all, you can still follow this tutorial, assuming you're somehow capable of actually creating a database with a single table in Microsoft SQL Server, of course. Now we can insert an actor if we want to. Okay, let's find its post invocation here. First name John, last name Doe. And importantly, of course, as we are invoking the create HTTP endpoint, we are getting the ID of the newly created item back to us, which is kind of important. So if we now go to the get invocation here, we type offset, I think 190. And limit 50, maybe, hopefully, we'll get to see our newly created John Doe actor here. And then, of course, if we want to, now we have the actor ID of 203. We can go back to our delete endpoint, which we so far haven't still evaluated. Invoke it, and ta-da, our actor is now deleted, which we can verify by invoking the get HTTP REST endpoint again, at which point it probably will not return John Doe, simply because of that our John Doe actor was actually deleted by our invocation to the delete HTTP REST endpoint. So let's have a look at the code and analyze it a bit. Go back to files, click modules, click tutorials, and let's start out with the get invocation here. Now, as you can see here, it requires two arguments, limit type long, offset type long. Then it connects to a Sakila database. This add invocation here simply means the following: add into the results of this expression. And then, of course, the question becomes add what? Okay, we know where to add it, but what to add? And of course, this invocation to get nodes explicitly informs what to add. And of course, the what to add is the every single node that is beneath our .arguments node up here at the top, which of course becomes an explicit arguments declaration. And of course, if you want to, you can comment it. These are the arguments the endpoint can handle. And you can also comment it with multi-line comments such as these. This connects to our database and then retrieves all the actors according to the given input arguments, blah, 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 etc. Now, what this actually does, MySQL read is a slot in Magic, and it happens to go towards your MySQL database. It assumes there already exists an open MySQL database connection, which of course is what's happening here at line 11. Then MySQL read all these slots, for the record, requires a table argument, being the table you want to react upon. The read invocation also can optionally take columns. Can of course here modify the column to return only actor ID and first name if we save it. Go back to our, let's open it in a different folder, go back to our endpoints, and then we find the actor get invocation here. As you remember previously, it returned all four columns. Now it only returns the first name and the actor ID. Right, we can modify this as we see fit. We can remove actor ID, save it, invoke it, ta-da, only first name, etc. And of course, this allows you to build any amount of projections you want to. You could do, aggregate columns, etc. Now, in addition to the columns declaration, all endpoints except the create endpoint or the posts, whatever you want to call it, can also optionally, as you can see here in actor.delete.hl, take a where argument. And where becomes exactly what you think it becomes. It becomes a where SQL condition, obviously. Now our where argument requires an actor ID, and it's also invoking validators, not mandatory, specifically saying, hey man, if I can't find an actor underscore ID argument, freaking throw, dude. Go berserk, don't even invoke the rest. So this line of code here, line 3, is going to throw an exception unless it can find a valid argument being of type long, having a name of actor ID. So it's impossible to execute from line 4 and beneath that line unless you actually pass in an actor underscore ID, and you can actually verify this by trying to invoke it and not pass in, and as you see, mandatory value was not given. Then it connects to a database, it adds the table. All 4 CRUD operation Hyperlambda slots requires a table argument. But this one, of course, also takes a where condition. It needs to have an AND, even though this is kind of like, superfluously, purely conceptually from this point of view in this particular semantic SQL creation, being an actor ID. Of course, referencing the actor ID. We see something similar input. Here we see first name, last name, and then we see actor ID too. Yet again, we invoke validators.mandatory, passing in the actor underscore ID argument, which results in throwing an exception unless it's actually explicitly given. You can test this too, of course, if you want to. And then it adds into the values column here of the MySQL.update invocation. It only adds these 2 particular nodes, first name and last name. Why? Because the actor ID is not going up into the values condition. It's actually getting into the where and actor ID, column, X, expression, alpha.arguments / asterisk implying all children / actor ID. So it doesn't pass in the actor ID into this particular argument to my MySQL.update invocation, but it rather passes it in here. And that's basically it, more or less. If you read the entire tutorial here, you will see it has a couple of other additional interesting things, such as the ability to, invoke raw SQL endpoints. Actually, we could try that, I guess. Okay, new file, raw.get.hl. Okay, let's create a file, and let's copy some things from here. Copy, get, it's raw, here we go, and then MySQL.select all, actually select count from actor, and then let's use scalar. Hopefully I'm going to be able to actually get this correct. Result alpha.mysql.scalar, and then let's unwrap this node, and then let's save it. Just go through it rapidly once more. MySQL connect, scalar, select count, unwrap, result, scalar, and let's then refresh our endpoints here and see if we can actually successfully invoke it. And we could, 200 actors. And of course, this latter part here describes slightly more details about how you can use raw SQL. In addition to that, the top parts here also to some extent describes it. So anyway, that was the CRUD Hyperlambda tutorial. You can find a link in the description to this YouTube video to a place where you can actually read the tutorial if you prefer to read it instead of watching videos, in addition to a place where you can copy and paste the code I used in this particular tutorial as I was creating the YouTube video. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.